Thank you so much to Dr. Rosa for providing this webinar today, focusing on conflict resolution. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today to talk about conflict resolution. This is, I think, my fourth in a series of workshops we've done. We've talked about morning meetings and the importance of kicking off the classroom atmosphere positively in the morning. We've talked about differentiated learning and the different ways we can cater to the diverse students in our classrooms. We have spoken about time management and tips on how to create more time for the classroom. And those are all on demand that you can see through the website or get emailed for a link. And today we're going to talk about conflict resolution. I'm sure if you reflect on the past 24 hours, or possibly even the past 24 minutes, you may have come across conflict. And this workshop is designed to examine different kinds of conflict, develop strategies for teaching students about conflict, and then learn about different conflict resolution styles. And in particular, we're going to put an attachment in the chat where you can download a document after the workshop and get to figure out what your conflict resolution style is, or the one that you flock to the most in certain situations, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of that. So, and of course, if you have questions, you feel free to put them on the chat, or if you're watching this recorded, you can always email me at mrosa@keiseruniversity.edu. So I put this together just to get an idea, or just to put some statistics on why we're going to focus on conflict. And these are some statistics I came across through my research. 1/3 of new teachers leave in 5 years. Half of new teachers in urban environments leave within 5 years. And one of the main reasons cited is inability to manage chaotic and conflict-ridden classrooms. While we're not specifically focused on classroom management for this webinar, but I know in the future there will be one. For this one, I really want you to identify what your style is, what you naturally go to, and then figure out what are the pros, what are the cons, and then be able to apply this. So this workshop will be able to apply to your personal as well as your professional, because the way you address conflict in the classroom may not be the same way you would address conflict in your personal relationships. So what is conflict resolution? First of all, conflict, sometimes you hear the word and people get very negative, but it's an inevitable part of life. When human beings interact, even twins, no two people think alike, no two people think exactly alike or share the same values and beliefs. And when there's a disagreement, that's when conflict can arise. But we will look at conflict as an opportunity for learning, for growth, and to develop more positive and productive experiences, especially if you're having a conflict with your principal, a conflict amongst teachers, or a conflict with students. The next day, or after the conflict, you have to see the same people, possibly. So it's important that we have a positive attitude when we think about conflict. So conflict resolution is just a process of resolving disagreements. You end a disagreement between two or more people in a constructive manner for all parties involved. Ideally, you'd want to create a win-win situation where both parties are happy, but there will be times, and a majority of times, where that's not going to happen. You can just look at our state of political affairs to see how conflict is being handled and how sides are coming across to a positive or not so positive solution. But conflict resolution in schools is designed to provide students with a neutral, safe environment where they can express their point of view and discuss issues in a mutually satisfactory manner. And next week, we're going to go even in further detail with our workshop on creating an inclusive classroom. So we'll provide even more tips on how to create that neutral, safe environment. So why should you study conflict resolution? Well, as teachers, you're going to come across conflict in the classroom or with parents. So it's important that we take the time to study this, to create a respectful and caring surroundings by formulating a safe school environment, and to role model and provide students with control over situations, because they're inevitably going to face many conflict, and on the playground, in the lunchroom, in the classroom. And we want to make sure we do not hide or shy away from it, but we address it and we role model good behavior, recognize good behavior, and then provide opportunities for improvement from a learning environment. So here, I'm a big fan of quotes. I always like to include quotes in my presentation. So William Kryler said, if you take time to teach conflict resolution, you'll eventually have more time to teach. This circles back to our time management workshop. If we're spending so much time disciplining, and that takes away from the teaching time. And then John Dewey said, conflict is the gadfly of thought. It stirs us to observation and memory. It instigates invention. It shocks us out of sheep-like passivity and sets us at noting and contriving. Conflict is a sine qua non of reflection and ingenuity. So having a positive outlook like John Dewey would give us a better approach to conflict resolution. So there are 3 levels of conflict resolutions. And in your classrooms, for the most part, well, there'll be times when you're just making a decision as a third party, but hopefully you will be able to have students sit down and actually resolve the problem themselves, or if it's with a parent, also try and do some negotiation. But negotiating is the first, and that's just as the term implies, 2 individuals sitting down and working out a resolution together. This can happen in the classroom, it can happen with a significant other. But having a disagreement, hopefully it didn't happen this past Valentine's Day, it was just wonderful. But there are times when there could be some negotiating, where are we gonna eat for dinner? What lesson plan are we going to choose today? How are we best going to address a student who 2 people have in a class? So there's opportunities for negotiating plenty of times throughout a given time period. Mediation, and that is where you have a third party assist in finding a solution. That could be you as the teacher. That could be your principal if 2 teachers are having an argument. That could be a teacher or a principal if there's a dispute between a teacher and a parent. So mediation could happen. And then arbitration involves a third party and is instituted when negotiation and mediations fail. So if you couldn't negotiate, then you have to go to mediation. And if that doesn't work, then there could be arbitration. And that is when the parties involved just cannot see eye to eye, cannot come to a solution, and even with mediation. So those are the 3 levels, and we want to keep our conflicts in our classrooms at the negotiating level, if at all possible. Not only will it save time in the classroom, but it'll also promote a more positive environment, and it'll give you more control of your classroom as well, instead of inviting in a third party. But if it has to happen, of course, then that's perfectly understandable. So there are different elements of conflicts, and there are some listed here on the slide for you. There are different players that are involved in your circumstance. It will be parents, students, teachers, with varying interests, and there'll be diversity. If you have some conflict based on generational differences or based on cultural differences, that's going to come into play with conflict. Different viewpoints, how you think a student should be taught and treated may be very different from what a parent feels should be taught. The student should be taught and treated. Feelings are always going to be involved. Conflict brings out heightened emotions, and you have to recognize that and have some emotional intelligence to get through the conflict. There may be a power struggle, perceived or not perceived. Parents may automatically, because you're the teacher, put you in a higher power. Or nowadays, parents feel like they have the power and they have the right to dictate some parents, their child's learning. So that could be one element when thinking about conflict. Skill and intelligence, some people may see if you have credentialed or not. That may be a balance of power when certain people get a title. That may cause a conflict. Experience, having teachers that are novice, versus teachers that are more experienced. There may be a conflict when those two try to make a decision. The resources that are available or the lack of resources. The environment that's created in a school system. Every school, every classroom is going to have a different environment. The meaning, how you interpret the conflict, identity, differences, change, and then values. So all these are elements that could come into play. But I think the most when dealing with students in a school system, they're all going to come into play. But the values and the players and the interests are going to have more of a heightened effect. So let's say you're getting ready to address a conflict and possibly be a mediator between two students and two parents. Let's set some. These are some ground rules you would do if you were going to prepare and sit down and have a conflict resolution mediation. So first off, you want to include all those that are concerned. And make sure it's set at a date and time that's comfortable and appropriate for both. You want to give a description of the problem that respects all involved. You don't want to have a misinterpretation of the problem, or you may think it's one way, or maybe one side talked more than the other side, so you got only that person's point of view. So you want to describe the problem if you're going into a mediation. So that way, you know, both parties can chime in if there's something that you're missing. You want to be positive if two students or two parents or two teachers are having a conflict. Explain how conflict resolution can enable all to win, and then explain the steps that we're doing now. Agree not to slip back to the win-lose method. In a conflict, our ultimate goal would be to have a compromise. So we will talk later about the styles and when people feel like they're winning, when they're losing, but you want to have as much as possible a win-win method, but sometimes it's going to be a lose-lose, but you want to shoot for the win-win. You want to find the time and place with no distractions. So you want to make sure this is in a classroom or somewhere that's there's not going to be any disruptions. If you feel like the conflict is going to get out of hand, especially maybe with two students, you want to have maybe at a place that's visible at least, where a fellow teacher or someone in administration can see and witness it. And then you want to make sure you get people to write down, make sure you have pen and paper so people can write down their ideas, or if you're using technology, a notepad. You should be encouraging, and if you're in a conflict, that people create, and all the parties involved create I statements. I feel when you took that pen away from me that I was hurt and I thought you had something against me. So making sure it's not you, blaming, but I. So use the word I, state how you feel, the specific behavior that you do not like, and then how you're willing to cooperatively resolve the problem. So this is very important. You may want to, if you have a phone, if you haven't downloaded the presentation, take a picture of this slide. But this is going to be the basis of your conflict, making sure that all parties involved, when speaking, create I statements. So you've set it up, you've prepared, you've sent the message about using I statements. Now it's time to get into nitty-gritty and to let the parties involved talk and identify what the problems and what the issues are. So as a mediator, you want to make sure you're enforcing to use I messages so that people can talk about their concerns. You want to encourage all parties involved to use reflective listening, and that you're constantly giving some reaffirmation and paraphrasing and rephrasing what people are saying to make sure that all parties involved understand. You want to evaluate exactly what each of your needs are with the problem. You may even go so far as to list the needs and put that on paper so people can visually see it. And don't accept any sudden promises not to cause the problem. And you may get that with people that avoid, whose natural style or tendency is to avoid conflict, that they'll just shut down and just accept what's given to them. So you want to be able to drag it out and make sure that everyone is in agreement. So some more statements that you want to have, because there could be many solutions when you're trying to mediate a conflict. So you want to ask, will it work? Does it meet all the needs of both people? What are the problems likely with fully executing the resolution or not executing the conflict? You want to give it time. You don't want to have 5 minutes or a time frame. So don't accept solutions for the sake of speed. However, if you're with 2 teachers or 2 students that have been are frequently in conflict, and you know that they will just ramble on and see it for one-sided, then perhaps in that situation you want to create some ground rules that you don't want to revisit things that have already been mentioned, that you want to find new material and focus on the agreement that was made. And use reflective listening, and of course those I messages, those I statements are very important. So here are some more general rules if you're mediating conflict between students or teachers that you want to focus on. So no use statements. Use statements that begin with the word I. Do not use statements that include the word you, because these statements make people feel defensive. Slow, as we talked about, it takes time to settle conflict. Go slow at first. Pause if you see that things are getting out of hand or there's a heightened sense of emotion. You may want it's okay to pause and then remind the students of the rules, and that they should begin using I statements. And if it really is an environment where the students are getting rowdy or they're not listening, then you may have to exit and seek out your principal or dean of students or someone if you're feeling threatened or unsafe, or you feel like there could be some type of hostile environment. And this will be challenging for some students, especially students with autism who already experience high anxiety in these types of situations. So in those circumstances, you want to make sure you role model the behavior, perhaps be proactive and do role plays for possible scenarios. So that way, when the conflict does arise, it's not new, and it could be you could remind them about the role playing. And then finally, compromising. If it all goes well, if you use the I statements, then the individuals involved can share ideas on how to solve the problem. Ideally, the 2 people would come together and merge their ideas, and then that will lead to a positive result. But these are the ground rules you want to follow as you go through conflict resolution. So you may be thinking one strategy is, so this was focusing on you actually being a mediator and dealing with conflict, but you may want to actually implement a conflict resolution program in your school. So here are some tips to doing that. And of course, you'll have to get the buy-in from the principal, who may have to get the buy-in from the superintendent. But if you don't have one implemented, this could be a great strategy for you to do this. So you want to construct a set of circumstances in the curriculum, integrating conflict resolution and a variety of subjects to amplify the lessons. So you want to get teachers on board, and then take opportunities with your lesson plans to just infuse that. So it's some of it will be intentional and some of it will just be hidden inside your curriculum, where you're just naturally teaching about when conflict can arise. Construct a multidisciplinary teaching approach that utilizes central themes as the focal points. So you want to talk about certain circumstances of conflict and situations and then have a more holistic approach. Instill conflict resolution strategies into every aspect of the day-to-day working of the room. So, this is not something you should ignore. And if you're an avoider, that may be your natural tendency. So you're gonna have to work to overcome that. So when you see conflict happening in the classroom, especially between 2 students, you want to identify it and teach strategies and role model that behavior. Some schools, there's an entire course solely dealing with conflict resolution strategies. So that's one option. Or you can teach conflict resolution strategy within one subject area. And then in your policies and procedures, if we have any administrators or future administrators on the call or watching it on the recording, think about, review your school policies and make sure there is a plan and an implementation in place to address principles and practices of conflict resolution. So I do want you to, at this point, pause and think about if your school does have these policies, and are they followed? And do they need to be updated if they don't exist? Now we have different conflicts arising through social media that may spill into the classroom, around safety and different people's opinion, different teachers' opinions on safety. So these are topics and areas that could be explored, and policies and procedures may be put in place. So what if specifically you have a conflict with a parent? I know this hardly ever happens, as I say very sarcastically, but there could be times when you are having a conflict with a parent. So here are some things to think about when you're having this. First of all, you don't want to, it's called dumping. You don't want to, everything you've ever thought about, both parents and teachers, just saying everything that's on their mind about their student, and just dumping all that information and talking without getting a word in edgewise. So you don't want to dump the information. You don't want to dump the responsibilities on the parent or on the teacher. Judgment. Keep in mind that there is prejudgment when parents and teachers are having conflicts. Teacher may be prejudging based on a student's how they come to school, their hygiene, the interactions they observe in the lunchroom or on the playground or in the classroom. So there are some preconceived notions teachers have, and there are preconceived notions that parents will have. When they ask students, well, how was your day? When they ask their child, what did you learn in school today? Whatever that child tells them, that's going to influence their view of you as teachers. Naturally, there are control issues. A teacher wants to control their classroom while a parent is controlling the home, and both would think that their way is preferred, and the teacher may try and tell a parent what they should be doing in the home, and the vice versa, the parent could be telling the teacher what they should do in a classroom. So there are control issues that you should keep in mind. Differences in values. Both teachers and parents need to remind themselves that differences in values can be bridged only by respect for each other's values and a willingness to compromise. So setting that groundwork, and those same rules that we talked about before, setting them when dealing with teachers as well. And different perception of the students. It's not surprising that students behave differently in different contexts. So by sharing these perceptions, parents and teachers each develop a greater understanding of the student. The student may be a nightmare in your classroom and an angel at home. And you need to be prepared that that's the reality for that parent, is that their child's an angel. And so having that conversation. So if you want to work with parents, here are some tips to maybe minimize the potential for conflict, or having a meeting where the parent may be a little defensive and hostile. So right from the very beginning, you want to contact parents early in the year with a welcome call. We don't want the first time that you interact with a parent to be something negative. If at possible, focus on a positive with a nice welcome call. And during that welcome call, or if a parent-teacher night or during an open house, you want to share your teaching philosophy and your classroom environment, what you hope to establish in your classroom environment, setting the expectation for the parents early on. You want to call not only when there's behavioral issues, but maybe if there's an improvement in the quality of work, or behavior. So try and call when there's something positive. You want to be empathetic. I know it's quick. By the time it got to a parent-student conference, there may be things building up that you want to dump on, but really, you want to be empathetic and think about the parent's point of view. Let the parent air out everything they want to say, and then simply say, I hear, I understand where you're coming from. Even if you are feeling defensive and the parent has accused you of a lot of things, if you want to de-escalate, the first thing, and we're going to say it later, I understand how you're feeling. Seek advice from other teachers. You may have teachers who've had Johnny in the class, and Johnny also was not behaving in the previous class, and that teacher may have some tips, or they may know, oh, Johnny's on medication, and today he didn't take it, or he's been off it, or they changed his dosage. So there may be other teachers may have information that can help you with conflict. And if there's nothing wrong with involving administration, especially during these times where things are being recorded, uploaded, put to on Facebook, social media, on the news. So you want to document all your interactions, and then involve administration if need be. Because chances are, if the student is misbehaving in your class, they're going to misbehave in another class. And also, if the parent is challenging, there may be other teachers that have learned how to work with this parent, or maybe the administration has worked with the parent. So you want to involve administration when you feel like it's been out of control. And here's a direct quote, something you may want to think about, when you're having those conversations. I understand why you might feel that way, but what we really need to do is find some solutions that we both can agree to. I'd like to hear your ideas. And it's not only what you say, but the tone of how you say it. Instead of saying, that's not true, or your son is not being truthful, I've never done that. So the words and the tone. And I know it's hard when you're in the moment and you've been thinking that the solution is to bring in the parent, and the parent is the student is going to change, and then the parent is just very dismissive. So just keep these tips in mind when working with parents. So for the remainder part of the workshop, and some of this, if you're watching it on demand, you're going to be doing this on your own time. So I'm just going to briefly go through the Thomas Kilmann conflict model. And this is a model that is designed, and there's an instrument, and we place the instrument in the chat or in the documents, so you'll be able to download it. It's about 30 questions upon which you're able to identify your style. And this is the style of how you address conflict. And the questions, they're designed to assess an individual's behavior in situations which the concerns of two people appear to be incompatible. So you're gonna, when people are in conflict, the spectrum, according to this model, is your level or degree of cooperativeness and your degree of assertiveness. Those with low cooperativeness and low assertiveness, well, they're going to avoid, because they're putting, cooperativeness is putting your needs first, assertiveness is putting others' needs first. So if you're avoid, you're going to be low on both spectrum. If you're competing for assertiveness, you're going to put your needs first. So assertiveness is the level of your needs in regards to others' needs. For those of you who will put other needs first, you're going to be higher on the cooperativeness, and you're going to be more accommodating if you put yourself low and others high. And if you have high cooperative and high assertiveness, then you're going to be more collaborating. And then there's compromising, where it's in the middle. So some view it, depending on the researchers, some see that as a win-win situation, and then others see that as a lose-lose situation, because not everyone is happy when it comes to the table. So it all depends on what your situation and what you're coming from. But remember, assertiveness is the extent to which the individual attempts to satisfy his or her own concerns, and then cooperativeness is the extent to which the individual attempts to satisfy the other person's concerns. And these are the two basic dimensions that we had. So when you take your model, you're going to get a score, and that's going to tell you how you mostly interact. But there is a different, every situation is going to be different. This is just what may be your natural tendency, but we all operate in these 5 hemispheres. And it's important to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of each, and then when you'll be able to use it. I personally, I am an avoider, so I avoid conflict whenever possible. I will run, I will make excuses, I will not show up, I will do anything I can, which is ironic while teaching, because you come across conflict all the time, but it's not my natural tendency. So let's go over each one, and you will probably, if you hopefully you will print this out, and you'll be able to see once you know yours, or maybe take a picture of the screen, so that way you know what your style is. So competing is assertive and uncooperative, a power-oriented mood. When competing, an individual pursues his or own concerns at the person's expense, using whatever power seems appropriate to win his or her position. Competing may mean standing up for your rights, defending a position you believe is correct, or simply trying to win. So, and I'm sure you've come across, or you may be this, and once again, there's no positives, there's no negatives, there's no rights or wrongs, but in the moment, a person who is competing really is focused on themselves and really thinks their idea is a great idea, and that they're right in the conflict, and that people should listen to them. So there may be times when you're like this or not. But once again, we're striving for to meet in the middle. So collaborating is both assertive and cooperative. When collaborating, individual attempts to work with the other person to find a solution that fully satisfies the concerns of both. It involves digging into an issue to identify the underlying concerns of the two individuals and to find an alternative that meets both sets of concerns. Collaborating between 2 persons might take the form of exploring a disagreement to learn from each other's insights, resolving some condition that would otherwise have them competing for resources, or confronting and trying to find a creative solution to an interpersonal problem. One of the big downfalls of collaborating is that it takes time, because you're continuously trying to problem solve, you're trying to mediate, and that could take time. So keep that in mind. All of these have their strengths and their weaknesses, but when you're trying to meet your own needs and trying to meet others' needs, you need to have the time to do that. Compromising is intermediate in both assertiveness and cooperativeness. When compromising, an individual has the objective of finding an expedient, mutually acceptable solution that partially satisfies both parties. I'm sure we would want members of our political, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, to engage more in compromising, and that is meeting in the middle and having discussions and having conversations where not everybody wins, but not everybody loses. Avoiding, and here I am, this is putting other people's needs and your needs, not being very unassertive and being very uncooperative. So when avoiding individuals does not immediately pursue his or her own concerns or those of the other person, he or she does not address the conflict. Avoiding might take the form of diplomacy, sidestepping an issue, postponing an issue until a better time, or simply withdrawing from a threatening situation. So I always need to constantly recognize that if I'm naturally avoiding, especially when it comes to other teachers may want to address an issue right away when there's a conflict, when my natural style would be, to take some time to think about it and not really want to address it in hopes it goes away. So you have to be sensitive to what your style is, and then also what the style of the teachers around you. Ideally, if you're an administrator and you're listening to this webinar, you will be able to download the 30-question assessment and give it to your teachers and give it to your work group, and they can everyone can know their styles, and then talk about what are situations when these styles are useful, when are they not, and how do they, overlap. And finally, there is accommodating. Accommodating is unassertive and cooperative, the opposite of competing. When accommodating, an individual neglects his or her own concerns to satisfy the concerns of the other person. So this is the people pleaser. There's an element of self-sacrifice in this mode. Accommodating might take the forms of selfless generosity or charity, obeying another person's order when you would prefer not to, or yielding to another's point of view. Today I was accommodating because we had a meeting and nobody wanted to take minutes. So I just said, well, I would do it, even though I really didn't want to do it. So accommodating can take many forms when you are having a conflict. So these are the 5 conflict styles, and once again, this will be more apparent when you take yours and figure out what your learning style is. And then I want you to do some research. You could take the free one that I posted in the webinar, and there's also, you could take the official one. There's a website. If you just Google search Thomas Kilman conflict mode instrument, and then you can pay a fee and get an actual report printed out that tells you what your 5, how you rate in the 5 conflicts. So if you think this is something you want to explore, that could be of interest to you. But when you collaborate, the message is saying 2 heads are better than 1. When you're accommodating, you're killing your enemies with kindness, compromising, splitting the difference, avoiding, leaving well enough alone. And then when you're competing, your might makes right. So your being assertiveness is what is important. So that is our webinar for today, with the goal of you actually taking, for those of you listening, taking the actual assessment and then spending that time recognizing what your conflict style is. So at this point, I'll entertain any questions if there are any. And you could put them in the chat or
Dr. Rosa, this was excellent. In terms of the survey, I'm sure, a questionnaire, many of us are going to take it if we haven't already to help identify our style. When it comes to also working with students, and especially with high school students, do you think that this is also appropriate for students to take in terms of identifying their style as well?
I think that's an excellent suggestion. And yes, high school students should take it. Even yeah, high school students should take it. And then more importantly is also to be to do the actual role plays and come up with scenarios, common scenarios that are happening in the high school where there would be a conflict, and having those students talk about it and role play what it looks like and what good conflict looks like, good conflict resolution looks like, and talk about the different styles and have them analyze their fellow student styles as well. So I think, yes, that's definitely, teaching those social skills to students is very important.
Thank you. That was going to be another question that I think would also be beneficial, is some ideas on some strategies that we can use, even though as educators, we certainly can use it this way, but just thinking ahead, if we wanted to also share some strategies. I think the role playing is an excellent activity, but are there any other ideas that you may have used before, or that you've researched regarding some activities for a student to improve, or not just a student, but adults? If you find that there's an area, like you say, each area has maybe a strength and a weakness. If there is a weakness, try to identify it, and then how to self-improve in that area.
Yeah, I think that, the basic message is that conflicts are going to happen. And we need to prepare, our students to handle conflict. Some things you could do specifically with students, teach students that, it's okay to ask for help. If there's a conflict, you're not tattletaling, but, creating that safe environment, and we'll talk more about that next week. Teaching students some calming strategies, especially those that may be in putting themselves before others, you know, telling them to take deep breaths, count to 10, take a walk, and then also teaching students to self-monitor themselves, so that they can recognize if they're in a conflict and they're getting angry and they're getting upset. You know, what does that look like? Does that mean their body is shaking, that they're feeling hot? And then I would suggest definitely doing that, and then having students write down what are the signs, and then have them come up with strategies of how they can overcome those, or what they can do. Almost like, you know, before they turn into the Incredible Hulk, before they turn green, what are some things they can do to calm themselves down? And then always reflection. Maybe teachers can talk with students who had a conflict, or just say, hey, what conflict have you had in the past 24 hours? If students are not verbal and they're not comfortable expressing, they can draw pictures, or write down how they feel. But more specifically, ask these students, you know, how did you feel? How did the other person feel? And then, you know, what could have been done differently? So I think those are some strategies that can be used. It's just about being very intentional, whether it be at the middle school or the high school level, being intentional with our students and finding the ways for them to feel comfortable expressing themselves, especially for those that have problems expressing themselves or controlling their behavior.
Excellent. Thank you
Sorry
so
for the
much.
long-winded answer.
No, it was very good. I think that everyone that's listening to this webinar could certainly relate to all kinds of situations. Like you say, it could be in the classroom, outside the classroom, and with all different ages. So it's just great to have some strategies on how to manage these emotions. And these are all strategies that we've also learned throughout a lot of these webinars the past few months. So it makes so much sense for us to kind of be on this topic right now. That's led us to the topic of conflict resolution. So we are so appreciative of these terrific and amazing strategies that you've provided to us in the webinar, as well as the responses to these questions regarding working with students. So that's fantastic. Any of our attendees